Good afternoon, everyone. Ben Rowsome from Ability Co-op here, and with me today we have the Dean of Science, Professor Aine Kelly. Aine, thanks for being with us this afternoon.
Very glad to be here and have an opportunity to chat to you. Just one tiny clarification there. Now it's a huge mouthful. I'm the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Science Education, which means that I look after the science degrees, because obviously the Dean of FEMS is a different person.
Understood. Okay, yeah, no worries, no worries. Sure. Okay, no worries. I suppose what we're looking to get from this sort of meeting today is sort of an insight as to how the new academic year come September will look, given the circumstances that we're now under with COVID-19, etc. So I've just got a few questions for you here, Aine, in relation to those kind of things. I suppose the first question I want to ask you is how the sort of new hybrid blended learning approach, or that is to say the sort of online learning approach, come the next academic year will look like. I mean, say for me, it's actually useful now. You're the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Science. I'm going into my second year in physics. So how might my year next year look like, given the circumstances now at the moment?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been a very difficult situation, obviously, for everybody. And what we're trying to do, you know, across the college and including in the science programs, is to figure out how we can get the best possible teaching and learning experience for students and the general student experience, with all of the sort of the safety guidelines that we have to put in place. So that will necessitate, because of the physical distancing, that we have to change the way we do things. So science students in particular are used to, you know, sitting in lectures with, you know, could be a couple of hundred, you know, other students. And obviously we can't do that because we have to space everybody out. And so a lot of the traditionally large lectures are going to be online. And we all have, I mean, all the continuing students have experience of that already, because obviously we had to sort of shut down under emergency circumstances back in March. So people had then a period of, you know, logging in and viewing recorded lectures, or else maybe having kind of live discussion groups and so on with lecturers. And, you know, there is going to be a big element of that because of the physical distancing. But what we want to do then is to use the space that we have to try to give as much face-to-face teaching to students as we possibly can. And that's for a couple of reasons. Obviously, because, you know, it's a quality teaching experience. So for the educational aspect on the one hand, but also just the social aspect of being on campus and getting to interact in real life with other students and with lecturers. So it kind of goes beyond the educational into sort of the social aspect of things as well. So what the face-to-face will be will really depend on the course that the student is doing. Right. So obviously for science students, the labs are a very obvious you know, area where we need face-to-face teaching, because students need, well, first of all, you need to develop the skills that you're taught in labs for, you know, data collection and so on, you know, but also to actually undertake that real experimental science that's, you know, fundamental to a science education. So what we're hoping for the science students is to have as much lab activity as possible. And then, of course, there will be tutorials as well, and depending on the size of the group and the type of activity, where we can, those tutorials will be face-to-face, but some of them will be online. So I mean, for other students in other courses, in health science courses, obviously they'll need to develop clinical skills, and some students go on clinical placements and they have to be done face-to-face. We're hoping that where fieldwork is part of courses as well, that we're still able to do field work, and there have been protocols drawn up to facilitate that, taking into account all of the safety measures that need to be included. And for other students, maybe in the arts, humanities and social sciences, language learning, or, discussion groups or tutorials and that kind of thing. So really for you as a physics student, I would anticipate that you'll obviously be doing lab classes, that there will be face-to-face tutorials and so on, and maybe some small lectures, but that your larger lectures will be online.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that's a great insight there, Anya. Thank you very much. And you certainly mentioned the idea that it'll depend obviously from course to course and faculty to faculty, which kind of runs into my next question. So you've answered this already somewhat, but I will bring it up again. Do you reckon that it will differ from faculty to faculty, say from science, arts and humanities? And if so, who do you reckon maybe will be the most affected given the new circumstances, and who might have to approach this from a different perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends. What we've done and the approach that we've taken across the college is to give rooms and spaces to particular schools. Okay. And then the schools will decide how they use those rooms. Because normally what happens is that, you think of all the large lecture theatres and so on, and, different students are going to be taught in different lecture theatres, for, all day and every day of the teaching year. So say in some of the Hamilton lecture theatres, there could be different groups of students in there from different faculties, or Goldsmith Hall or the Arts Block lecture theatres. So what we realised is that trying to centrally timetable all of that stuff for multiple rooms, for multiple groups, when we don't have a kind of a normal timetable, that would be really too difficult. So what we did was we looked across the board at all of the teaching spaces that we have, and they were measured for the physical distancing, so we can understand what the capacity of the lecture theatres would be. So this is sort of a very sort of scientific, analytical kind of process. Yeah, sure. So we know for each of the teaching rooms, including the labs, how many students we can safely accommodate in those spaces. And then we looked at the number of students who are enrolled in different programs across the college. And we basically divided out the space across the college according to the number of students in a program. So different schools have been sent a list of rooms that will be their rooms that they have control over for the year, and then they timetable what they need to for different students in the different rooms. Okay. And the reason for that was we wanted to be as fair and equitable as possible. So if we kind of allocate the space like that, what that means is that students, no matter what faculty or school they're in, should have a fairly equal opportunity for face-to-face teaching. We thought that logically that was the best way to approach things. So because of that, hopefully, no students should be disproportionately affected depending on what faculty they're in, because we've divided out the space evenly. So obviously for a lot of the science courses, the labs are sort of managed by particular schools. So we couldn't give lab space over to, students in the arts, let's say, because it's not appropriate for that activity. So a lot of the space that the science schools have been allocated is within the labs, and then of course some other lecture theatres and teaching rooms. So by taking that kind of a sort of a logical approach and basing it on the students who are enrolled in different modules, hopefully everybody will get an equally fair shot of face-to-face teaching. That's the intention anyway.
Okay, yeah, that's fantastic to hear, Anya. I mean, it's quite apparent from your description that a lot of planning has gone into this, which is fantastic to hear. And as you say, in the hopes that hopefully no one will be significantly sort of disadvantaged in comparison to, say, another faculty, which I think is great to hear. That's great, Anya. So then my next question then, I suppose specifically concerned students with disabilities who may need to access particular materials. Like I'll give you an example, say if someone who is, say deaf students who need to access captioning or something like that, or perhaps a blind or a dyslexic student that may need to access other materials. How can they get access to those basic needs that allow them to participate given the new circumstances?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, this is really important, sort of, you know, physical access to the face-to-face sort of spaces, and obviously every other aspect of accessibility with the online materials.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been I met with the representatives from the Ability Co-op.
Oh, yes, that's right.
A couple of months ago, and we had a good chat about that, and you know, they raised, you know, concerns around this. So myself and Declan have been liaising with IT services about captioning and about you know, other ways of accessing tools in Blackboard and so on for accessibility purposes. So what we're hoping to do is to progress that. We don't have the final kind of, you know, plans on that yet, but certainly it would be Declan's hope and my hope that we'll be able to find a way of captioning as much of the material as possible. So I can't say definitively that that's going to be possible for everything. We hope so,
yeah.
But we have to have further discussions with IT services about that. And I think one important point that was raised as well is that obviously, you know, there are some students for whom the captioning will be, you know, key from an accessibility and disability point of view. But I think it's also useful for lots of other students, including international students and so on. And so we're absolutely mindful of that, and we're hoping to work towards a plan where that's possible. But it's certainly, you know, being considered. The other thing that we've highlighted to staff is that there is a web link for sort of accessibility of different rooms, because you will know, and we all know, that, you know, most rooms in the college, teaching rooms in the college, are accessible, but there are some rooms that there may be difficulties for some students. So we've encouraged the schools, when now that they have their space list, to check that website just to flag if there are any accessibility issues for students, and that they're aware of that and can, you know, make arrangements or be mindful of that when they're scheduling in their teaching. So I think, you know, it's such an important point, and it's definitely something that's being planned for.
Yeah, that's great to hear, Anya. As you sort of said yourself, it's going to be hard sort of to predict what challenges will come, I suppose, with respect to that. But that's great, obviously, to hear that it is being taken into account, and hopefully we can do everything in our power to make sure that we don't run into problems like that come the new academic year. The next question I have here, Anya, just concerns something that we've actually been discussing a lot in more recent times in the co-op, and that's anxiety. And I think it's worth bringing up because, I mean, I personally myself would suffer a lot from anxiety, but I think it has to be said that a lot of students, or all students, if you like, coming into the new academic year will be having some form of anxiety from, I suppose, the perspective that there will be a whole new array of anxieties now given the current situation, as well as pre-existing anxieties sort of being amplified somewhat, where maybe they weren't a problem before, perhaps they're a problem now. And another thing someone brought up as well is the fact that there are certain sort of anxieties that we just won't be able to predict. We'll come into the new academic year and we'll go, oh, wow, I didn't see that coming. Okay, that's a problem. So forgive me, Anya, if this question is a bit clunky, but I suppose my question is, what mindset should we have coming into the new academic year so as to minimize this as much as we can? Or how are we going to combat these challenges, I suppose, in that respect?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And it's so tricky because there's a lot that we don't know about how this is going to work in real terms for all students and for staff as well. I mean, staff have anxiety around how all of this is going to work too, because everybody is also, you know, there's a balance there, because we want to give as much face-to-face teaching as possible to students, but we also want to make sure that we have all of the safety considerations taken into account, that we're following all of the guidelines and so on. And so everybody has to be confident that we have thought very carefully about those things, and that we're maximizing everybody's, you know, health and well-being as much as possible. So, I mean, that relates to COVID and the actual threat of COVID, you know, but also just general well-being for students and for staff, and you know, and how they feel about the whole thing. So I think one of the things that's going to be important as well is sort of orientation. And there's a lot of work being done at the moment around orientation for new students as well, you know, for incoming students, because I mean, I feel kind of particularly sorry for, you know, the school leavers who are coming in now, because, you know, the whole run up to the Leaving Cert that didn't happen, and all of that stuff was pretty miserable, you know, and now they're kind of, you know, coming into a different type of college experience. So what we're going to do is to make sure with orientation that all of the usual stuff around what's the college experience going to be like, you know, how do I pick my modules, how do I register for things, you know, all of that kind of practical stuff that we always do. And then, you know, how to join clubs and that kind of thing, but also how to learn in the new environment. So there are resources being prepared to help students, and this is important for incoming students but also our continuing students. So how to study in this different type of environment using these different kind of approaches. So those kinds of resources are being prepared. But I think in terms of general mindset, I mean, it's important that we you know, we try to be as positive about this as possible. We know it's different. We know it's not the ideal. We know it's not what people want their college experience to be, but we're trying as far as we can to give students that campus experience, the teaching experience, and the social interaction experience as well. So we're doing what we can to make that happen. And just that, I think we all have to be very mindful, staff and students, that this is a different situation. It's a difficult situation. We have to be very cognizant of the kinds of things that you're talking about, student anxiety around what's happening, how the assessments are going to work, and that kind of thing. So I think if we all go into it with the mindset of, we want to give students the best experience that we can. We want to make it as near normal as it's going to be, even though it's not going, not going to be normal.
Of course,
you know? And I think just a little bit of flexibility and understanding from everybody, you know, from the staff and from the students. But I think maybe another thing that might help to assuage some anxiety is that we're thinking and planning carefully as much as possible, you know, every aspect of what the student experience is going to be. And, you know, all of the usual supports are going to be there as well. Students should absolutely, you know, talk to their tutors. Any students who are registered with the disability office, obviously there's disability liaison officer and so on. So just for students to, it's more important than ever that students use the supports that are there. And I think that's an important message to get across as well.
Yeah, thanks, Anya. It is certainly a tricky one, but from what I'm hearing from you, it's clear the college have given this a lot of thought. So that's fantastic to hear, Anya. I suppose the next question I have concerns something that could well affect a good number of students, but it's hard to say. I mean, I'm quite in the dark about it myself, but it's as regards travel, getting in and out of the college. How's that going to look?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's we're, you know, it's funny because we're planning around everything that's going to happen on campus, and then also in our other teaching sites, because some students obviously have to go to the hospitals and so on for their clinical training and that kind of thing. So we're thinking about everything that happens with, you know, within the walls of the campus, but we're not an isolated bubble. You know, there's all the wider the wider stuff to think of as well. One of the things that's happening is that there's additional, you know, bike parking going to be available. We're looking at the provision of showers and so on, so that if students want to cycle, you know, or walk or you know, or whatever, that, you know, that will be facilitated as much as possible. I mean, as far as public transport goes, we're really dependent on, you know, what is happening in general in public transport. You know, I think obviously the fact that, you know, masks are required for public transport, those kinds of safety things, you know, that's obviously key, and that everybody abides by those rules. So I mean, it's difficult because we're dependent on other, you know, other national agencies and so on for that kind of thing. But I think it's probably a good thing that, you know, where possible, and obviously it's not going to be possible for everybody, that you know, cycling to college is encouraged and it's facilitated as much as possible. But I mean, other than that, it really depends as well on what the campus, how much time students are going to be spending on campus, and, you know, how many days they're in and all of that kind of thing. And I mean that, so how many public transport, you know, events that they have to kind of undertake. And that's another issue, and we're very aware that students really want to know what their timetable is going to look like and when they're going to be on campus and how often and so on. And all I can say is that we're working on that. We don't know yet. We can't tell students, well, these are the days you're going to be in, or these are the kinds of activities that you're going to be engaging in. So we won't know that until September. And I know that's an additional source of anxiety for students, and especially those students who are thinking about accommodation, you know, and whether they need to rent accommodation in Dublin and so on. So I mean, we're working as quickly as we can to try to get the final timetables you know, confirmed, so that we can let students know about that. So I don't have a straight answer on that one yet, but we're working on it.
Okay, no, that was a very good insight, Anya. Thank you very much. That was a big help. So just a few last bits here, Anya, before we finish up. I suppose the next question I have is with respect to library access, and I suppose this is more a two-part question, I suppose, with respect to accessing books, but also the library as a study space. I am conscious that the libraries are currently open, but there's obviously a heavy monitoring of how many people are in the library at any given time, etc. How is that going to look come the new academic year?
Yeah, so there's a whole bit of work being done around that. So Helen Shenton, who's the college librarian, she's responsible for all of the library spaces. So the first thing that happened a few weeks ago was that Kinsella Hall was opened up as a study space. And because of the time of year, it's mostly postgraduate students who have been using that. But obviously, you know, particularly as we come up to reassessments as well, and some undergraduate students who have reassessments will need library access. So one really good source of information is the college website, and also the college social media channels. There have been things going up on Twitter and on Instagram and so on. So there's, for the whole college, there's sort of a phased reopening, which is kind of in line with the national reopening. All of these sort of dates that are kind of, you know, that are being marked out or have been marked out by the government. You know, 10th of August is the next big one. So for up-to-date information on the library, the website is a really excellent resource, and students should keep an eye on that just to see how the plans develop. But there'll be sort of phased reopening in terms of borrowing as well. I think there's a click and collect system put in place. So for the library, it's the study spaces, of course, and then it's the borrowing and the use of the resources as well. But again, all of that is being very carefully planned, and all of the information then, as it's becoming available, is being communicated through the channels. So so as I said, Helen Shenton is looking after that, and she's doing a fantastic job. So I mean, we can expect, just as there is physical distancing in the teaching spaces, there's physical distancing in study spaces as well, and that applies to the library. So it will look different, but the library resources will be available to students, and there will be, you know, a reduced number of study spaces, but still study spaces available across all of the different libraries.
Okay. Yeah, so a lot of work going into this then. Clearly, that's great to hear, Anya. Fantastic. One final question, really, and then what I might do is, once I've finished this question, I might just ask you, do you have any final comments to make or anything you'd like to add? But I suppose you've kind of answered this question already throughout the course of this meeting, but I will ask it specifically again. I mean, more from, take a student like me, who's clearly been isolating for a long time and is itching to see friends again, etc. I suppose, just to provide the example of, say, when Trinity Ball was cancelled last year, and that was a huge blow to a lot of students, I think particularly a lot of fourth year students who would have been finishing, etc. And I suppose that runs into sort of, say, society meetups, etc. and stuff. How is that going to look? I mean, are Trinity going to put in their own sort of rules and regulations in respect to this? Because, I mean, a lot of students will want to sort of see one another, if you like. Again, forgive me if it's sort of clunkily phrased, but I think you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's hugely important that, you know, that the ability to interact with your peers, and then the ability to undertake the kinds of activities that students enjoy in clubs and societies, is still available. And certainly the clubs and societies are, you know, developing plans and liaising, you know, with all of the sort of the people in college that can help with this. Breda Walls, who's the Director of Student Services, is heavily involved in looking at how clubs and societies are going to run over the next year. So, I mean, it starts with sort of orientation and Freshers Week and so on. And so we're hoping to have a mixture there of sort of, you know, face-to-face and online orientation, but that students will have an opportunity to kind of find out about clubs and societies that they're interested in joining. And then again, in terms of Trinity having its own regulations, you know, everything that we do has to be according to the national guidelines. Okay. So whatever the physical distancing, masks, hand sanitation, whatever, all of that, we're absolutely abiding by that in every respect. But within that, then, to give students the opportunity to undertake, you know, activities like use of the sports facilities, or like, you know, where there are meetings and so on of clubs or societies. Again, they'll have to be physically distanced, which might mean, I don't know, but I think it might mean that maybe the number of attendees would have to be reduced. But, you know, all of that kind of thing, I suppose, would have to be figured out by the individual clubs and societies, but within the national guidelines. So again, you know, everybody's very used to sitting in front of their screens and, you know, not seeing people in real life. And, you know, we want to maximize the opportunity for students to be able to do that. So having campus life is very important. And that's another reason why we want as much face-to-face teaching as possible, so that the students can be on the campus and be interacting together. And in between classes, then having space that they can go to, you know, get their lunch, have a coffee, chat to their friends, all of that kind of stuff. So it's going to be different, like everything else, but it's going to happen in a different form. That's really important. And it's important to note as well that the student unions, the graduate students union and the students union have been really involved in all of the planning as well. Fantastic. We have different committees that have been set up to plan all of this stuff, and we have student representation on all of those committees. And what's really clear and what's come through very strongly is that students want face-to-face teaching. They want to be on campus. They want clubs and society activity. So we're doing whatever we can to make that happen.
Fantastic, Anya. That's great to hear. I did say that was going to be my last question, but I just, more as an afterthought, I do have one more question, purely because it is a quintessential part of the academic year. I just think it's worth addressing. Is Freshers Week, where purely, and again, this sort of runs into what you said earlier on, sort of the regulations of having a huge number of people in one space. Are there any sort of regulations being put in place for that? Will that be run differently, or will it cover the same? So more with respect to orientations, etc.
Yeah. So we're having to change our plans a little bit, and the reason for that is because, as you will have seen, the CAO offers are going out later than was initially anticipated. So what we had initially hoped was that we would be able to run Freshers Week from the 21st of September, and then all the teaching and everything would start on the 28th of September. Now the first years are coming in later, so we'll have to sort of run Freshers Week kind of alongside some of the teaching that would have already started for the other groups. Mm-hmm. So that puts an additional difficulty that we had hoped wouldn't happen. But look, that's the way it is, and we have to react to what's happening nationally and the complications because of the predicted grades and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So Freshers Week / orientation will be a mixture of online, and now probably a good chunk of it is going to have to be online, but with some face-to-face elements as well, because especially for the new students, it's important that they kind of come in and get to know the campus and get to find out about all of the services and so on that are available. So like everything else, I think the Freshers Week is going to be kind of hybrid. So that those plans are being developed at the moment, and all the schools now are being asked about, you know, what kind of orientation they want to do. Normally, what I would do is I'd go in and give a talk to the different first years in kind of big groups for the science courses. That's not now going to be possible for all of the science courses, especially the bigger ones, because of physical distancing. But then we'll do kind of online or, you know, interactive talks or that kind of thing. But there'll be a mix, but where we'll try and do as much face-to-face as we can for orientation.
Fantastic. That's great to hear, Anya. That was a very great insight across all those questions there. That is all the questions I have for you at the moment, Anya. But more just to wrap up, do you have any final remarks you'd like to make, or anything you'd like to add to some of the stuff you've said so far?
I mean, I think I've covered everything. I think, you know, the most important thing is that the students know that we're doing the best we can to give the best experience, and we're thinking really carefully and we're planning really carefully. And that means that it's taking quite a bit of time. So I just want to kind of, you know, I want to reassure students that we have their, you know, their education and their general experience at the heart of everything that we're looking at, and that we don't have very quick answers, particularly on the timetabling and when students are exactly when different groups of students are going to be on campus and so on. But we're working on that, and we'll have that information to them. You know, it will be September, but it will be as soon as we can, and just that. You know, it's that we're all in this together as well, all of the staff and all of the students, and you know, just we're trying to have a positive mindset on it, that okay, this is the difficulty that we're in, it's not the way we want things to be, but we'll make them we'll make the experience as good as we possibly can, given all of the different restrictions. And then just to remind students that all of the usual student supports are there for every student, and obviously the students were registered with the Disability Office. So, you know, use those supports, we're here for you. We're, you know, we'll try and make the experience as good as we possibly can for all of you.
Anya, that's a fantastic insight. Thank you very, very much for your time this afternoon. I think this will be of great use, certainly to us here in Ability Co-op, but also to students alike around the college that will be very nervous, I'm sure, going into the new academic year. But yeah, that all that stuff you've said over the past 40 minutes, I think will be of a huge help to students. So thank you again, Professor Aine Kelly.
That's great, and I'm really delighted to have had the opportunity to speak to you. And if you have any follow-up questions or anything, just email me or let me know. And I'm in contact with Declan as well a lot. So you know, if there's any other, just get in touch with me.
Fantastic, Anya. That's brilliant. Thanks again.